Hi everybody, welcome back to the Code Bakery. Today we're going to be continuing the React series, and in this lesson, lesson number 2, we're going to be introducing the useState hook. This is a very important hook, and essentially what it's going to allow us to do is add a lot of logic and essentially add the use of variables within our React projects. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to use the same project that we built on last time. And let's first just cd into our project and then run the command yarn start. So this is just going to get us to see where we're currently at. And then essentially what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be using the state hook to create a counter for our counter in our project essentially. So let's just wait for this to run and then we'll be able to see what we did last time. And just to remind you guys, essentially what we did last time was we introduced, we set up our project and then we also introduced props. So props are essentially just a way of passing data in between components. And so as you can see, we passed the name Aryan from this parent prop in the app.js class to the text.js class. As you can see, it says props.name. And then when we essentially see our, once our program is loaded, we'll be able to see hi Aryan. So let's get that. Let's just wait and we can see it running soon. And there you go. As you can see, there's no styling or anything, but as you can see, it says hi Aryan. And then let's say we wanted to change it. So let's say hi John. Let's save that and then reload. And then as you can see, it says hi John. So as you can see, we can change up whatever information we pass, and it essentially acts like a function. And as you can see, it is actually a function that takes props as an input, and we can change whatever this is. So that is essentially just a quick review of passing data in between parent and child components. And now let's get started in talking about adding logic to our components through the useState hook. So what is the useState hook? Essentially, the useState hook is a feature in React that allows us to add logic and variable functionality to our projects with only a couple lines of code. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to import useState from React. So you see this line number 1, just import React. What we're going to do is we're going to add a comma, meaning we want to add another library. Then we're going to have two parentheses, two curly braces, and then we're going to write useState. And I highly recommend you guys use Visual Studio Code for your React projects, and essentially a benefit of that is it will fill in a lot of the things you want to do. And so for example, it filled in useState. So now that we've imported it, what we need to do is we need to declare it. So essentially what we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to be creating a we're going to be creating a counter. And so there'll be two buttons, one to lower the counter and then one to make the counter increase. So in order to have a counter, we need to have a counter variable. And so what we're going to write is const counter, then set counter. This is different from other things such as Python or maybe normal JavaScript because we're in React. And here's how it's different. Now we rewrote const braces counter comma set counter equals useState 0. Now let me explain what this line means. So essentially we see const. That is the same as normal JavaScript saying we have a variable, a constant variable. Okay. Then the name of our variable is going to be called counter. Then the what is set counter? Set counter is essentially a part of useState. So the first thing is set counter essentially is whenever we want to change our counter variable, we're not going to write like counter plus equals 1. This code, so this line is wrong in React. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to do set counter to counter plus 1. This is the right code. So as you can see, because we have the useState, and this is just essentially something related to like the React DOM, you have to be using set counter rather than counter plus equals 1. So then essentially we know what set counter is going to be, and this essentially, when you define this variable, you're just defining the names. And so you know that the thing in blue is going to be your variable, and then you know the thing in yellow is going to be your setter, essentially. Then we write equals useState parentheses 0. So useState tells us that we want to use this library that we just imported, and then the value in between the parentheses after we say useState is going to be the initial value of our variable. So for example, let's say we wanted to set our counter to 0. That's why we've used useState 0. Now another example is, let's say we have a product, right? So let's say we're selling a pizza and the price of our pizza is $10. And so what we would do is, let me just copy this code and then change the names. So we'd have a variable pizza price, then set pizza price, and then useState instead of 0, because the default value is 10, we would just change it to 10. And then let's say we had a string, right? And so this works across all data types. And so essentially what we could do is string. And this is just going to be the default for S and then set S. So for string S, the default value is going to be this value. It can be anything. And so whatever is in between the parentheses of the useState function, essentially, it's just going to be the default value that you're setting your variable to. So let's delete these two example lines, and let's delete this. And now let's get back to coding our counter project. So we've set our counter variable, and we've created our counter variable. And now what we need to do is let's pass that in. So let's keep this just because it's from exercise 1. We'll write a comment saying exercise 2 or number 2, and then we'll paste this here. Okay, so basically this is good. So essentially what you see now is you see that we're getting 2 red lines. And that is because a component, no matter how many elements you have in your component, it needs to pass one overarching essentially state back to its parent. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to wrap with this. And so this doesn't do anything, it's blank, but that gets away the error because it's telling, essentially it's telling the program that we want to send both of these back because they are both encompassed by these brackets. So let's actually remove this comment, but yeah. Anyways, now let's do the same thing of how we use variables, how we put variables in our essentially converting from JavaScript from JSX to HTML. What we're going to do is we're going to have 2 curly braces and then counter, which is the name of our variable. So then if we save this, and then let's go back. So if we save this and let's go back, it seems like I closed the tab. Let me reopen it up. So if we save it, we go back, you see, hi John, and then 0. So that is great. Now we just need to add our 2 buttons, and then we will finish our counter. So the first thing we need to do is let's have a button. And then this is going to just have a minus sign, and then we'll have a button. It's going to have a plus sign. So essentially what we want to do is when we click these buttons, so as you can see, when we click this button, we want the counter to go down 1. And then when we click this button, we want the counter to go up 1. Let me just zoom in so that it's clear to see. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to use the onClick property of the button and use that to set the counter to 1 minus itself. So what we're going to write is onClick, and then all we have to do is set counter we have to wrap this in parentheses, and set counter to just be counter minus 1. So let's save that. And so onClick parentheses set counter, which calls a function that essentially changes the value of counter to counter minus 1. So onClick is going to run a function. And so instead of set counter, what we want to do is we want to call a function. So we can just write function, or actually, here's what's better. We can call an arrow function. So an arrow function is the same thing as a function. It's just that it doesn't have the word function in it. So what you're going to do is you're going to have this parameter with a equals and then a greater than sign, and that is essentially going to tell the program that you're writing a function. And then what you can do is you can pass this in and just write set counter to counter -1. Save that and go back, and so now you can see it's the same thing, but now when we press this, it went to -1, and you can see that's still there. So now let's just code up. Let's use the same logic, and we can copy this over to this one, and then instead of -1, it'll be counter +1. So as you can see, what we can do is now when we go back and check, let's reload, and as you can see, it reset back to 0. And now when we do plus, it goes +1, and then minus is -1. And now we've successfully created a counter. So that is how to use the useState hook. And in the future, we're going to be discussing some more hooks and how they can increase the functionality of our program and how we can use these hooks in entirety to create a React project from scratch. So hopefully you guys like that. Feel free to post any comments you have in the suggestions. Any suggestions you have in the comments. And yeah, I'll see you next time. All right, bye.